I remember, I remember when I took Dakota to my mom, and we met at like a parking lot, and I'm handing her off to my mom to take her so that I could go to the hospital. And my mom and I both were on the same page, and my mom goes, I really thought about like putting a helmet on her in the car and kind of like laughing at herself at like the like craziness of that, but also like I was like, yeah, I thought about that too. like there's something about when you're looking at, you know, your baby's, you know, possibly going to die, and then like, okay, this is my other baby, and I just had my tubes tied, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh. And so you know, it started real early on getting a lot of neurotic and fear-based thoughts to protect Dakota.
Hello, and welcome to all of you beautiful souls tuning in today to the Heart of the Soul podcast, Earthing Nova on YouTube. My name is Amana, and I am so happy that you're here. This is a space where we remember what it means to be wild women walking upon this earth, navigating the ebbs and flows of change, honoring each other's differences, and connecting about that which unites us. Together, we practice using our voices and the ancient ritual of storytelling, sharing our stories of birth, life, and death, and celebrating how we and they change across time. I hope that soaking in these stories will leave you feeling inspired, connected, and more alive in your own beautiful body and unique life. Today is Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. I am currently in the bedroom of my tiny little mobile home in Mississippi. I have my dear friend Cami here with me today. I met her about 8 years ago in Spokane, Washington at a full moon goddess gathering. We saw each other often at gatherings throughout the years, mostly around the full moon. I felt connected to her depth right away, and over the years I got to know a little more about her, including her daughter Cierra. I'm honored to have you here with me today, Cami, to share about your journey of mothering Cierra, both when she was here with you in the physical form and now that she is in spirit. So I just want to say thank you for showing up today to share about your daughter Cierra. And if you would like to introduce yourself in whatever way feels good to you, and then take us wherever you'd like to begin.
Oh, thank you. I'm also practicing saying you're welcome. It's so, why does that sound, why does that feel so weird and awkward when it comes out? But I feel so genuinely your gratitude and want to acknowledge that and that reciprocity. Gosh, I don't really know how to introduce myself probably ever. That's not like a skill I seem to have in life. I think if I were to try, I don't know. I don't know if I have a view of myself that I'm too complex, or kinder word would be dynamic. That I'm like, how do I sum myself up? But I suppose some of the literal things are, I am the mom of 3 kids, and been married to my husband for 20 years, and the 19th year was the hardest so far. But he's my best friend, and we're exact opposites. I'm more in the, sensitive, like sensing the metaphysical realm, and he's in the very literal, having to trust me about my experiences because it's pretty foreign to him, or completely foreign. And then our firstborn is Dakota. She was born in 2005. Our secondborn is Cierra, and she lived to be almost 6 years old and died in, born in 2007, her body died in 2013. So she hasn't been with us physically for, I think that's about 9.5 years now. And she would be 15 years old, I think. I don't know. What's been really weird is I've had a hard time keeping track of how old she would be after her body died. But I think she would be that old now. And then about 5.5 years ago, we adopted our son, from China, and he's deaf and has some other developmental disabilities. And so those are the three kids that I call mine. And I'm self-employed and a Gemini. Some people might stop listening now that I shared that. Others are going to be like, yeah. What else? I don't know.
What are you passionate about in life?
For people to see each other as just, I say people first, but really like that spiritual being inside of each person and the perfection of everyone, and even people who I consider to be like heinous, who are, whether they're sociopaths or career criminals, to really just like be able to see the perfection in them. And for me, my spiritual journey is to see Cierra in everybody, and including the people that it's very difficult for. For instance, some politicians. It might be really hard for me to want to see my sweet Cierra, and but that's my spiritual path, and so my passions kind of stem from that. And then just like anybody who has an experience of being oppressed, suppressed, unseen, underserved, I definitely would like to use my voice more to impact and improve their lives.
Beautiful. Did you always know that you wanted to be a mother? Or what was that journey for you?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a very traditionally patriarch family, very conservative upbringing, so I don't really know how much is like conditioning versus authentic, but I would say it's both, probably, is what my gut says. When I was younger, I really felt, and like it annoys me now to hear myself say this, but like I really felt like I was put here on earth to be a mom, and I don't know why, it just like, I think it's like the most powerful thing to do, and there's the shifting in consciousness of like, and we're more than that. We're more than just moms. And I don't mean to just it, but like there's more to it. Like we are these powerful entities called mom, and we're also these other things. And so I have like a little bit of like a struggle in saying it the same way as I used to. But yes, I have always known I wanted to be a mom, and my identity has been very tied up in it, to the point where I've had to really learn how to shed a lot of that after Cierra died. And then our living daughter, Dakota, is very independent, and our son is not as emotionally available as Dakota is. So it's just been this kind of been a lonely experience for me to be a mom, to be honest.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, motherhood, we have so many expectations. Society has so many expectations upon us of, being the perfect mother, and our children also being perfect children. And, it's so different. For me, like what I expected motherhood to be like, and then what the reality of motherhood has been and continues to be. And I also experienced obviously not exactly the same, but just the reckoning of being not just a mom. I understand how you all, I feel the same way, not saying just a mom, that doesn't feel quite like the right language to use, but that I'm also more than a mom. I'm also unto myself, and
Right.
important all on my own, separate from being mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for motherhood for you, was that, was it different than you were envisioning, or?
Yeah, so, I mean, gosh, I started with, my first pregnancy, I just felt green the entire time. I was 24 when I got pregnant on purpose with Dakota, and I just felt like shit. And can we swear here?
Yeah. It's explicit. You can definitely swear.
Okay, good, because I like some of the words. So that was like the first, this isn't what I expected, just feeling like trash. And so that was just, it sounds like, oh, okay, that's so normal or whatever, but it was a really negative experience. And it really set me off on a path of, what this could be like. And then when Dakota was born, she was so colicky. And I've really only met maybe one other mom who described her child sleeping as being as bad as Dakota's was. And it lasted until she was about 3.5 years old. No joke, she'd wake up every half hour. And the longest she would sleep is 3 hours for the first 3.5 years of her life. And she also had severe colic and, just spitting up. And the doctor that I went to at the time and I would express to, I guess just didn't really take me that seriously. And maybe I wasn't, super outspoken about it. Because to me, I was like, if I say my child's spitting up and fussing a lot and doesn't sleep, I thought that they would understand that I'm not saying, and I think this is normal. I thought they knew I would be saying, I believe this to be in an abnormal category of normal. So, normal occurrences at an uncommon rate. But they didn't, and I just didn't know how to advocate for her the way I needed to. So she was very uncomfortable for a really long time, and I was just at my wit's end, not sleeping. And then I got pregnant with Cierra, and we pulled the goalie. And by the way, I had endometriosis before I ever got pregnant with Dakota or Cierra, and so I'd already had surgery on my uterus by the time I was 21 maybe, and 21, 20, somewhere in there, 21, 22. And so we didn't know and I rarely had periods. Matter of fact, in my whole life, I only bled for maybe, I was in 10th grade, and then I had a partial hysterectomy by the time I was 30. So I had very few years of bleeding, and I would oftentimes go 6 to 9 months without a period. So there was a really good chance that I would have fertility issues. And it turns out I got pregnant very easily both times, which is very interesting to me, given my medical history. And
and when you got pregnant with Cierra, you were still in this sleep-deprived state with Dakota?
Yeah. Wow. But I knew, I wanted my kids to be relatively close together in age. And so when Dakota was about 2, not quite 2, it was kind of the heat of the moment, and I was like, I don't need to wear a condom. And so, and then literally afterwards I went, I just got pregnant. I had this very spiritual experience, beyond just an amazing orgasm. I don't even know if I had an amazing orgasm, to be honest. I don't remember that part. But I remember, having this, deeply spiritual moment. And I had, all these things coming to me. And so I was like, I'm pregnant. And my friends still joke because the next day we went out to, a little pub, and everyone was getting a drink, and I ordered a glass of wine, and I was like, I don't think I should drink because I'm pregnant. And they were like, you're pregnant? Of course you shouldn't drink. What are you? And I was like, well, no, I just got pregnant last night. And they were they all just bust out laughing. And I was like, no, really. And I did.
Amazing.
So, yeah. And Jamie was gone a fair amount during that time. So it's pretty concrete that's when it happened. But anyhow, so then I go through that pregnancy, and I felt really good, very different pregnancy. And but the interesting thing about that pregnancy was when even though everything was going so smoothly, so well, I just had this, like, foreboding feeling like death is near. And I couldn't figure out how to articulate it. I knew something was up with my baby. And, at the time I would have used probably the word wrong. That was just the language I had back then. And so the language I also had, because I had, less access to information back then. And so what I was like, I think this baby's going to have Down syndrome. They're going to be born, at the time, the word I used was hermaphrodite, like unisex, something going on genetically with their sex chromosomes. So we picked out the name Alex, in case that were to occur. I thought maybe the baby was going to be born stillborn, have autism. Like, there was a list of 5. I think I'm forgetting one thing, but that was all I could contemplate as being possible.
Wow.
And
how did you, walk through your pregnancy with that and hold that? That's...
Yeah, well, like, when I would tell people, they were like, oh, you're just worried, it's normal to have pregnancy jitters. Because if people would ask, it was like, they were like, how's the pregnancy going? I'm like, well, something's wrong. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know. Everything's going perfectly. I just know something's wrong. And they're like, what? And the other option, I think, was I was going to die in childbirth. But it really felt like something was going on with the baby. And now, so when Cierra was born, she was born cesarean section, and the first thing I asked the doctors was, because I had 2 doctors and all the nursing staff and surgical staff, I said, does she have all 10 fingers and toes? And that was my way of saying, does everything look, exactly as we would hope it to look? And they said, they just laughed and they said, yeah, she's perfect. And of course they were right. She was perfect. And so I also had my tubes tied. I knew that I was done having biological children, and that, because I always wanted to adopt, becoming a parent by adoption was actually my plan A since I was about 8 years old. And I was told I was too young. And even though I owned a home, like, I'd served in the military at that time, I was married, I had a stable job, and all the things, I was too young to adopt, but nobody would think twice about it if I had my own biological children. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic when there's so many kids in the world. Millions. So anyhow, I was like, okay, so they tie my tubes, they take me into recovery, and then my husband came back in the room and was like, well, they think they found a cleft palate. So she didn't have a cleft lip, but she had a cleft palate. And then he came back a while later and said, well, and immediately I'm like, okay, this is going to cause problems for breastfeeding more than likely. And then he came back in the room a while later and said they think they found a heart murmur. And he's super calm about everything, just his nature. And so that helped. Plus I was on, pain medicine from the C-section. So I was staying pretty calm, but like there was some heartache starting to bubble up pretty fast. And then they said, okay, we have to take her to Sacred Heart, and I'm at Holy Family Hospital across the town. So they take her, they have like a...
Did you get to hold her or anything before they started doing all this and taking her away?
Say that again?
Did you get to hold her or anything before that all of this unfolded?
No. So during this whole period, I still haven't seen her other than this moment that Jamie held her up by my face on the other side of the blue tarp, and we took a family photo. And I always coined that photo, ignorance is bliss. It's that quintessential mom laying down with the C-section, dad holding baby, the 3 of you look. And I just am so, like, blissed out that she has all 10 fingers and toes, and she's breathing and all the things. So I saw her then, but didn't get a hold of her. And then it took quite a while for these different things. I couldn't tell you exactly, but probably a couple hours of them doing different evaluations and then getting the ambulance and stuff. And so when the intensive ambulance crew came in, it wasn't just a regular ambulance crew, They had respiratory therapists and RNs and that kind of stuff with the. When they brought her in like a little, I don't even know the word for it, like a little pod and cocoon thing, and so she's like totally like wrapped in this plastic bassinet, basically bubble, and so I got to like reach through and touch her, but I feel like my hand was even in like a rubber glove. Like I don't even think I was touching her skin. And they said we can only be here for about 30 seconds, and they meant it. They were only in with us for about 30 seconds before they took her to the other hospital.
Wow.
So I convinced my doctor to let me go that day. Good. And my husband was like, please don't get discharged from the hospital today, because if something goes wrong with your healing and you end up like, this could be much worse. And he's like, this is basically, he asked for himself that I stay. And so I honored that, but I did get them to release me the next day, which is still quite early. At least back then it was.
Right.
And I was able to get up and see her, and she spent the first 82 or 83 days in the ICU. And during that time frame, started to learn more about her medical conditions, and it was called ring chromosome 18. And at the time, they had something like 143 documented cases ever in the world, because they started testing chromosomes in the 60s. So it was a fairly new phenomenon, and I'm sure many people born with it, were never even tested. And they didn't really know much about it. There was, maybe a dozen cases in the United States at that time at most. And I've actually ended up communicating with most of those moms through the years, particularly when Cierra was alive or shortly after her death. And we became Facebook friends and different things like that. And a few I'm still in touch with. But the ring chromosome 18, what details do you want? I don't know where to...
Yeah, just whatever, you feel like would be important to share for your story and for other people to understand about her.
Okay. So she ended up, I remember one time going through all of her medical conditions and just like starting to name them off. I think it was just probably with a family member. And I spoke for a half hour without pausing at a really similar cadence as I'm speaking right now. And I spoke for a full half hour before I had named everything I could think of that she had for diagnoses. From prosencephaly, which is a neurological condition with the brain, agenesis of the corpus callosum, information highway between the right and left hemisphere, cleft palate, stenosis of the kind of not the upper and not the middle lobe, kind of between the upper and middle lobe of her lungs. She had 5 different cardiac conditions, immune deficiency, endocrinology issues with her pituitary gland, and precocious puberty, severe hypoglycemia to where she was on continuous feeds through her G-tube, literally 24/7 to keep her blood sugars stable. And so I guess the thing that's interesting that's coming up for me right now to share is, a lot of people were like, why not just let her die? And, Jamie and I spoke about that the very first, night that she was earthside. We were like, well, maybe the kind thing is to let her body pass. And the long and the short is we really followed the guidance of the medical staff and the experts, and we didn't feel comfortable starving her to death. And we felt like, anymore G-tubes are much more common than people think, and it just gives them food through their tummy. And most kids with a cleft palate are given that because they're going to aspirate too much through their palate. So it was a reasonable thing to feed her. We weren't giving her crazy antibiotics to fight infections, that kind of stuff. And we also thought it was reasonable to give her oxygen. She wasn't ever on a ventilator other than after open heart surgery. So we just did what we felt like reasonable interventions, but when I would list off all the things that she had going on medically, it sounded like we were keeping her here to suffer And I fought with that a lot through the years on whether or not I was doing that out of a selfishness for me or for her. And at the time, it was so hard on me to have her because she just logistically was so challenging. We ended up with 18 hours in-home nursing care eventually. It took a while to build up to that and fight with insurance and all of that. But, I mean, she had to have constant supervision, so it was so tasking and so challenging for me just to give her basic cares.
What were those?
Make sure she wasn't.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to ask those, like first 80 days she was in the NICU, you said, and you have Dakota that's, a toddler at that time. And do you want to give a kind of a snapshot of what that period of time was like for you?
Gosh, unfortunately, it's not a very, that part's not a very original story. There's all the babies being born premature. And at that time, I don't know what it looks like now up there, but at the time that my kids were being born, in vitro was making a lot of multiples. And so there was a lot of premature twins and triplets with Cierra. And so I feel like I've met a lot of people who have spent a lot of time in ICU and many who had another child or children. And so you get through it. We had a really great support system at the time who lived in Spokane. My mom and dad were phenomenal at taking Dakota. They also had a clubhouse for the kiddos at the hospital, which is no longer there. Through COVID, they shut it down. But hopefully that'll come back at some point. But that was, so that we just kind of made our way through and had some friends that she would stay with. But it was hard. She went from being like the center of our universe to Dakota did to being like, passed around and like not seeing us as much. And I was super worn down. And so I did my best to overcompensate, kind of. So it kind of made a more extreme pendulum swing that was just the best I could do. I remember when I took Dakota to my mom and we met at like a parking lot and I'm handing her off to my mom to take her so that I could go to the hospital. And my mom and I both were on the same page, and my mom goes, I really thought about like putting a helmet on her in the car and kind of like laughing at herself at like the like craziness of that, but also like I was like, yeah, I thought about that too. like there's something about when you're looking at your baby's possibly going to die, and then like, okay, this is my other baby, and I just had my tubes tied, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it started real early on getting a lot of neurotic and fear-based thoughts to protect Dakota. And so that poor kid has been really fucked up her whole life because of that, I'm sure. I'm like, I'm putting away for your therapy, don't worry.
You mentioned that before Cierra was born that you had the potential name Alex chosen. How did you land on Cierra once she was Earthside?
Both of our kids were named before we saw their faces. Basically, I mean, we don't have quite the stories that some people have where they feel like their child chose it or different things like that. It really came down to I would choose names I liked, and if my husband likes them or not, and just agreeing. Yes. And I don't know. I think there's a sense of like with Cierra, and it was spelled Cierra, and Dakota. I don't know. And then our son came to us with the name Son, and there's something to me that just feels divine about those names. Like it's they just feel big and powerful and beautiful, and so I was glad. Jamie liked those names and settled on them.
So you're navigating, feeling more protective of Dakota, now that Cierra is born, and that what you knew was happening when she was in the womb, that reality was true. And then when did she come home with you, and what was that like?
Yeah, it was a disaster. You spend the night at the ICU, and they teach you how to use the machines and the oxygen and all this stuff, and I barely understand it. Screwed up 10 times, but they're like, well, you went through it once successfully, you'll fumble through it at home. And I remember coming home, and a nurse greeted us here who we didn't know, and we had her set up kind of in this like hallway outside our room, and kind of a square hallway next to the back door, like just odd. And I remember like just shutting down and going into the room and falling asleep, but like the kind of sleep that's like escapism, and very unlike me to do that kind of thing in my life. I haven't done that a lot, but it was like some sort of coping mechanism that I later have seen Cierra do when she would get like physical therapy. Like her body would be kind of being bent in a way for a stretch, and she would just fall asleep. And so I think it was just a coping mechanism. And I remember Dakota was so excited though, because she was not allowed in ICU, and so that was her first time really getting to touch her sister. She had seen her through the glass at Holy Family before they took her, and she just wanted to be a big, this will get me. I think my greatest heartbreak with all of this now is the hards and the hurts that have happened for Dakota in her life. She's an Aquarius. She's like super sensitive and super fierce and strong, and comes across almost aggressive sometimes. But she's so sensitive and so deeply caring, and sometimes I just feel bad that I wasn't ever able to give her a playmate. I pictured having like 4 kids, and that they'd all be really close in age, and that they would just get to grow up playing and adventuring and just doing fun things and driving each other nuts and all that normal sibling stuff, and I did not give her that, and I think it could have been really good for her, and I have to trust that like she had some agreement before coming here that it's harder for me to trust that this is exactly what she needed or wanted, because I guess sometimes I have a hard time trusting that for myself too, but I do know having these unique experiences gives me a little bit different lens, or a lot different lens to view life through, and I'm grateful for it. But I do see people who haven't had a lot of the challenges with their kids, and who have just kind of average students, and typically developing bodies and health, and I'm like, I don't even know how to relate to them as parents, really, other than the love. And I can like love their kid with them, and I can relate to them on love, but like how it's actually been for me to parent my kids has been like, because the other thing, like Dakota's like she's just got interviewed to go to Stanford. Like, we don't know if she got in yet, but like she's brilliant and just kind of off the charts with some of the way that her brain works, and pretty much almost every single thing that she attempts to do, she becomes extremely good at it and stands out, with just a few exceptions, and even knows if she put more time into it, she has the focus that it's pretty incredible. And then I had Cierra, so Dakota got tested for hydrocephalus because her head was so big it went off the scale, and there's a big old brain in there. And then Cierra had microcephaly; her head was so small due to neurological issues. And then I have son who's deaf, adopted at an older age, on the autism spectrum with other language delays on top of all of that. And so I'm like, I don't know what it would be like to just have like an average human being as a child and how to parent that. And it really, it's really been lonely for me to not be able to have the conversations with other parents and, that they're having. Like, I cannot participate. I can only imagine what that is for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. That is, such a unique mothering path that you have with these 3 different children of yours. And I can, hear through the way you're speaking about it, like you said, you use the word like lens, like you can't help but view life through a different lens and have this different breadth of understanding. And I wonder if you're able to articulate a little more about what that is for you, like how it shows up in you personally and your life. Maybe not necessarily, I understand that, you can't have the same dialogue and conversations with mothers who have like normally abled children, but how these distinct lives of your children have shaped you and changed, altered that lens that you view life.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, like the first thing was, I remember, so I was like, I'm going to go out for a walk, which was like a big deal. Like, I was really confined to the house. Like, I didn't go to the basement unless I knew somebody was over, kind of hovering over Cierra for the most of her life. And I went out for a walk. We had a nurse, and I just felt like, when the nurses were here, I was like trying to, I should also say, the first year of her life, she had 155 appointments in a year. And in that same year, she spent 6 months of her life, so like 165 days in the hospital. So when you then take out weekends, because the appointments were almost never on weekends. I'm trying to think. I don't know that there was ever an exception to the rule on that, other than maybe like a blood draw or something. Basically, through those Monday and Fridays, in the 6 months that she wasn't in the hospital, which it wasn't like 6 months straight, it's like bouncing back and forth from home to the hospital, she then usually would have anywhere between 1 and 3 appointments a day, with just a few random days that didn't have an appointment. And so it was a super intense year. And I remember, so I go out for this walk, and another story popped in my head, but I'm going to try and stay focused here. So I decided to go out for a walk, and I'm like, and before we live on rural property, and before I'd even gotten 100 yards down the road, I had this book idea come to me, and I'm embarrassed to say I have not completed it yet. I think this first one's going to take me the longest, and after that, my children's books hopefully will all start happening much faster. But it just hit me like lightning. It was just came down, and I just felt like this conduit for a message. But the long and the short of the message that I really got from my kids that I want to share with the world is, I have this one kid that's so brilliant, and kind of the things that are both annoying because she can be so good at everything, and she can be annoying, but also what our society kind of worships and is good at math, good at I don't know, all these things that our school system is built for kids like my daughter, as far as she was a monkey in a tree, and she just knew how to navigate the academia side of school. And then there's Cierra, who is as low functioning as a human can pretty much be, other than if they were vegetative. And she definitely was not vegetative. She had a personality that was just sweet, and I can talk more about that in a little bit. So she was, but these very different personalities, strong and fierce for one, kind of sweet and calm for the other. one is brilliant and the other has, at the time, what I would have called mental retardation or developmental delays. And I realized like that they're both so perfect however they come out. And of course, everything in between is as well. And so it took having like these extreme, a child on each side of the spectrum to the extreme for me to realize like it's all perfect. She was born exactly as she was supposed to be born. And so that really informed how I see people now.
Mm-hmm. What was most supportive to you in those early years? Or, were there things that people did or didn't say that did or didn't, support you in that time?
Placations always, I didn't even know that's what they were called, but the placating comments are annoying to me to this day. I have more grace for them now probably than I did back then. I would get more irritated. Like God wouldn't give you more than you can handle, and only the specialist, or like the most special moms or parents are giving kiddos like this, or and the easiest thing to compare ring chromosome 18 to what, for me, when I was explaining it to people, would be to compare it to Down syndrome, because which is a terrible example actually, but Down syndrome has the 3 copies. We have 2 copies of each of our chromosomes. Down syndrome has a third. And it's on the 21st chromosome. In Cierra's case, it was her 18th chromosome, and instead of having an extra copy or even her full copy, part of hers was deleted, and basically it formed a ring. And so I'd kind of compare it. And some of, like, Cierra had, I think they refer to it as a carp-shaped mouth and kind of low-set ears, and little difference in how her eyes were situated on her face. And when she was little, you couldn't tell as much. As she started getting a little older, you could see it more, those differences. But, she was just so pretty. She was such a pretty girl. But where was it? I'm sorry, my ADD just took over.
No,
so what was the question?
It's all good. I was just asking, like, for people who might be listening, like, what was helpful that people did or said, and what was not helpful.
So I remember now. So because people would always, after I'd shared that, then they would compare her, and even in looks, like she was mistaken to have Down syndrome numerous times by people that I never shared her condition with. And so people would say, people with, and they would use fairly disrespectful, without knowing it, language and how they would speak, but they would basically tell me that all people with Down syndrome are always happy and just like all these things. And it's like, no, I know a lot of parents with kids with Down syndrome, and I know their children, and they're not always happy. They have personalities and they're human, and they can get pissed off just the same as anyone else. And so there was just all these weird things of people wanting to project what they needed it to be. Like, this is so hard, I can't handle what it really is, so I'm going to tell you what I think it is, because this is how I digest it, and can deal with the fact that this is so hard. And they just basically tell themselves lies to make themselves feel better. And that was hard, because I wanted to argue and be like, no,
Yeah.
And I did a lot. And then there comes a point where it's like, I don't have the energy for that anyway, or do I actually value your opinion? But it's hard to have people have these weird, just very distorted views of what we were going through in a way that minimized what we were going through so much. And then the people who just knew how to sit with me in the dark were the ones who were the most helpful, who just were willing to say, yeah, this is hard. And I'm so sorry that, Cierra is dealing with so many challenges. Like, it's not easy to see your child go through that. I found just those really they often felt like more quiet, like less words of their own, and more listening, and more just like being there with you. With us. Yeah. That was the most helpful.
Would you share more about Cierra, about her personality or her essence? What did she love in this life?
Oh, she was, okay, so on her headstone, so Jamie and I were going to we were going to cremate her body because laying a body in a box, which goes in another box in the ground, especially with embalming, like it just felt really icky. And I'm gonna promise I'm gonna answer your question. But to have Dakota feel comfortable when she heard like that her body would be burned, like that really freaked her out. Dakota was 8 years old when her sister died, and so even though we were equally as horrified of putting her body in a box in the ground, we knew we had more tools to navigate our shit about it, and so. So Dakota planned Cierra's funeral, and she picked out the casket and the headstone, and the headstone has two hearts overlapping, and they symbolize Dakota and Cierra. Oh, every time I talk about Dakota with this, it's when it gets me. So it really has to do with their love for each other, and Cierra loved her sister. Dakota was always crawling up in her crib with her. She was real little her whole life, and she didn't sit up very well, so she had a wheelchair when she got older and would be like kind of strapped in like with a harness so that she wouldn't flop over because she had low muscle tone. But when she was in her crib, Dakota would like crawl in and play with her. And Cierra was also she was like, there's like a scale of like blindness and deafness, and Cierra was like, I'm going to just say like for simplicity, 3/4 of the way down the scale for both. So for all intents and purposes, she was deaf and blind and had cognitive delays. So her main two processing centers weren't there. And then the way that her brain worked with it added on top of it. But they would interact, and it was just pure bliss and pure joy. And so Dakota and Jamie and I, we thought about what we wanted to put on our headstone, and that's the only part Jamie and I kind of consulted Dakota with. And we put on there peace, love, and joy, because those three words embodied her existence as a spirit. And I'm realizing how much I miss that manifested in a human.
Yeah.
Certainly, each of those things still show up in my life, but not at once through one human the same way they did with her. She just, there was nothing about this world that could jade her. She couldn't get that information. She was literally deaf and blind to it, and she didn't have the cognition to process it had she lived old enough anyway. So her spirit came and went exactly as pure, on the day that it arrived as the day it left. And yeah, that's pretty fucking special.
Yes. Would you like to share anything about, her transition towards death or that time period, or would you like to talk more towards the way that you mother and commune with her in the world of spirit?
That's a good question. So I'd really forgotten who I was the last few years, 2 to 3 years, and got really wrapped around the axle on a lot of things involving being human, politics, and how that dynamic affects our family, an extended family particularly, and being someone who just cares, I'm someone who gives many damns, and so I get really upset about certain things, and I can look at them logically, but I'm also someone who just feels the pain of disconnect with people, and that's the part that hurts my heart. And so, long story short, I have not done a good job of being present to Cierra's essence the last few years. And so it feels kind of foreign for me at this point. But after she died, which was quite sudden cardiac situation, which is, we always knew she'd be done when she said, or when her heart stopped, because through everything, she went through so much. And she would fight through respiratory stuff. And we thought she was going to die so many times. And called 911 so many times. And I mean, even with like out crazy interventions, the kid she would fight for it. She wanted to be here. And it became really apparent. And we always said, if her heart stops, we'll know she's done. So we knew, like, and yeah, so many times we had to talk about, okay, if this happens, like the DNR kind of form, but they were really detailed in the hospital. And so we had to go through every scenario under the sun so many times, and then something weird would happen. She needed transfused, and we never talked about that. What do you do? And when her heart did stop, though, even though we'd gone over it so many times, Jamie and I both were like, you know, we want to try to bring her back. And we just had to know that we tried, I guess, even though we both knew, like, that was it. I was driving to the hospital when it happened, and I got to the hospital before I just sprinted through the hospital in a sundress and took my flip-flops off, and it was August, this beautiful sunshiny day, not the kind of day people die, right? Like, and they weren't even going to hold her in the hospital, but I told them, no, she needs to be here, something's wrong. And they were like, well, we can't find what it is. I said, I know, but I need her to be here. I don't know what it is, I need her to be here. And so the fact that she was even there, they didn't really think she needed to be. And they did have her on a heart monitor, though, so that's why they know that, let's see, is it V-fib? That is like the light switch going off? Yeah, so that's what happened for her. Not AFib, but V-fib. And so I beat the crash team there and took a monitor off her foot so that when they brought paddles, it wouldn't burn her skin. And I just remember all I could say was, I'm so sorry. Because the day before, when I had told them she needs to be here, it was in the evening, and she had just spent that one night. And I remember after being in the ER and getting upstairs, none of the information transferred, and they wanted us to go through everything again, which is a really long process when you have a history like this.
Yeah.
And the nurses, they knew her. She was on Madonna status. They didn't even say her last name. It was just Cierra. And thankfully, one of the nurses who knew her said, don't worry about it. I got this. You can, well, what led up to it is I started having a meltdown. I was usually pretty calm, and matter of fact, the hospital staff was really always kind and very complimentary towards my husband and I for our coping mechanisms, which felt like, I mean, I suppose it looked like that to them. I thought, yeah, but I go home and I fall apart, you know. But that night, I remember my hands were making big cross motions across my body and out, like giant X's. And I was, I'm done with medically fragile. And I've always thought she knew I was done, but I was never done with her.
No.
I just couldn't be medically fragile anymore. And she died the next day. I felt very like, oh shit, she knew, and I have to do my best to not make it wrong, and that she was trying to give me a gift, or I don't know. She was so sensitive to energy, though. Like, she just always knew. She knew who would walk into a room. We would watch her pulse oximeter. Her oxygenation would change. Her pulse would change.
Wow.
depending on who came in the room, and she just knew. And so that was really intense for me. And
Yes.
I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully unpack it.
Mm-hmm.
I have definitely felt like killed her at times, and I've also thought, like, her spirit was so perfect. I don't think that she would have had, like, she didn't have the same kind of cognitive thoughts. It was very vibrational for her, how she experienced life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're operating on that level that she would have been, I don't think probably that she had the same kind of right or wrong about it that I do, but I do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but then after she died, I mean, I remember, like, before, like, I knew something shifted before the hospital called to say she's in defib, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt the universe shift, and
Yeah.
like, to the point where I picked up my phone to call my, like, soul sister, because I was like, what just happened? Like, it was like a rubber band snapping,
Mm-hmm.
like, big inside my brain, kind of a feeling, but it was vibrational. And I remember when I was sprinting through the hospital, it sounds so corny. It was almost like I had, like, a little, like, parakeet spirit of Cierra, like, on my shoulder. Like, I felt her literally next to my head as I was running. And the weeks after her body died, I remember thinking, like, all this physical world felt so, like, fake. Is all, like, not like the kind of, like, Kardashian fake kind of stuff, but, like, it just felt like if I tapped my arms to make sure I was real, like, that it was someone was playing a joke on me or something. Like the metaphysical world was so much more real to me. And, you know, I didn't take any sort of drugs or alcohol or anything like that during that first week. I was probably a bit dehydrated and not sleeping well, but not to the extremes where I was, like, hallucinating or anything. But it was so real, that access I had to her, and it was as if she was, I mean, she was with me still. And one of the things I credit to that practice of how I got there was, and I'm really, this is a good reminder to me to practice this more, is when I would do things away from the house, when Cierra had her nurses with her, like, on occasion I got to go to the lake and hang out with my family or something, and I'd be so sad that I didn't have both my kids with me. And I remember many times, like, sitting and just bringing Cierra, like, present in my mind, and the next thing I knew, I would really sense her, you know, in our home and what she was doing. And I could just really sense her being, and bringing that with me wherever I went became a really important skill for me, to not be just, like, raped by sadness. It's kind of an aggressive way to say it, but that feels how it was. It was this really aggressive sadness. And so I was able to bring her with me, and so I'd already practiced being present to her spirit when we were separated, but she was still Earthside. And so I can say with certainty, like, it was her that I was feeling. And I have not practiced doing that much. Now it tends to take a little bit more dramatic things for me to sense her. But I don't know if maybe that's because I don't know. There's a lot to unpack still for me but it's a practice that I'd like to start doing more again.
Yeah, and it's okay not to know. And I can understand how, the physical separation for that moment in time, you said that first week really magnified your connection to her in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
How did...
I've been in it for so long.
Yeah, how did you and Jamie and Dakota, like, grieve and, you know, as you remembered Cierra and continue to carry her with you, like, how was that in your marriage? If you have anything you might want to share about that.
Yeah, I've heard for a lot of, the statistics for divorce is very high when you have a child who is born with a developmental delay. It's also really high if you have a child born with illness, and then of course it's really high after death. And so we had all of those going. I would say, oddly, for our marriage, those things were never our issues. Like, the things that are our issues are much more nuanced, like how we communicate and what we think the other means, that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, both just kind of our nature and some learned skills through some different personal development courses that we've done, we are pretty darn good at recognizing that everyone processes their emotions differently and that it doesn't need to look a certain way. And I'm a highly emotional person when it comes to like letting my feelings out and not holding it in. And by the way, I went through years of my life being very stoic, and I just didn't find it served me. So I was like, well, that's stupid. So, I'm not afraid to cry. Obviously, Jamie has cried 3 times about her passing, and and when he got to the hospital, that was not one of them. So we were in the hospital room with her dead body, and he did not cry. And it didn't strike me as odd, because I know his heart, and I know, he was a total fucking mess. It just didn't look like it to most people.
Yeah.
But I think that's like maybe my ability to sense that about him and just to trust his heart. And then, so I have only seen him cry just a little bit at her funeral. And that's okay. And so I bring that up because I think it's important, if anybody else is going through that, to realize that it's okay. But I think the other thing we each did is we gave each other space to be exact. Like, we didn't, like, he never was like, you're too emotional, and I never once was like, you're not emotional enough. Like, it just wasn't a thought we had, and it wasn't anything we would ever, say to one another or anything. So there was always a space for each of us to show up however we showed up.
Yeah, you supported and respected the different ways in which you grieved and remembered, and Yeah,
to the point where it almost just was like there really wasn't even a lot of thought that went into it. It was just the way it was, and there was, but not in resignation, in a very peaceful way.
Yeah. And do you have any ways or things, traditions that you choose to do in your family in celebration of her, or remembrance, or?
Yeah, we're not, I feel like a lot of people are much better at like really doing like overt things.
They're not better, they just choose differently.
Yeah. So, let's see here. Her birthday is December 20th, so it's right before Christmas. So it kind of changes, but like this year, I think I can't even remember, but I know that we've actually like done Christmas on, it was this year. This last winter, we celebrated Christmas with my mom and dad. I'm not necessarily like a huge holiday for me, but it was growing up in our family, and so it's been really cool to move celebrating, for me it's more like the solstice and Yule to Cierra's birthday, which is like a day or two, depending on the year, I think, different than solstice. So I do a mantle that is got pink and green and stags and very feminine cream colors and lots of like twinkly lights, and it just is very representative of her. And then anytime we see those really crazy sunbeam rays that are shooting out of clouds, we call them Cierra rays, because it's the morning of her funeral in August. It was just the most incredible sky that I've probably ever seen, to the point where somebody like over probably 150 miles away, took a picture of the sky because they were seeing the same thing.
Wow.
And framed it for us because they weren't at the funeral. And it was just like, ours kind of comes sporadically because we never know when those beings will, but we get really present and have a moment when we see those and we acknowledge it out loud. And then on the day of her passing, I try to do something adventurous that reminds me that we are alive physically. So, like last year, we went ziplining. The year before that, we did a really cool bike ride called the Hiawatha, and that's, mostly downhill and, pretty, like, kind of where it, like, feels like an all-day adventure. And, like, yes, we're alive, we're here.
Yeah.
And that feels like a good acknowledgement.
I love that. How beautiful. What beautiful honorings. Is there, I know I want to be conscious of your time. Is there anything else, any other little stories or things you feel would be important to presence in the here and now? I don't know what I would want to close with. Like, I think the thing I need to acknowledge for myself is that I'm still learning how to parent Cierra's memory. And I need to just continue to remind myself that what my experience is what my experience is, and that I don't need to label it or worry about if it's understood or not. Whether it's, I don't know, there's just a lot of semantics around death and heaven and all these things, and they're both helpful and not helpful, and that ultimately, it's just my journey to navigate, and it's going to be a lifetime journey. Oh, I would say I do believe Cierra lived a lifetime. We say that she died young in so many ways, but for her, it was a lifetime. And when I think about all that she went through and to experience life energetically, solely, or primarily, I should say, like, that's a long time to be in that realm of, physical challenges. And I oftentimes do find myself wondering, like, I don't really know what I believe or don't believe, but sometimes I will have this fun little idea that, like, maybe she was an angel who somehow ended up in a human body, and she had to come in that human body because had she come in one that could contemplate more of our humanity, her spirit may not have been able to leave as pure as it came. And maybe, like, the reason that she came is because maybe she was becoming a jaded angel, if that's even possible. I don't know if angels have personalities like humans, and maybe she had to come to feel how surely humans can love. Oh, Cami, you just honor and share about her and your own journey so vulnerably and honestly, and I just I'm like moved to tears right now trying to express how beautiful and important and how grateful I am for you to share with me and all the others that will be listening. So thank you.
Thank you. Really, really, really so nice to talk about her. It's so nice to have, like, cracks on my exterior to let some of the continued grief out. It's lovely. Thank you. Appreciate being able to tell her story and my experience of her story.
It's been such an honor to soak in these stories, so thank you.